But before I begin today, this is our first meeting since two federal officers shot and killed an American citizen, a VA ICU nurse, Alex Pretti. Alex was exercising his First Amendment right by filming federal agents on a public street. He was also exercising his Second Amendment right as a law-abiding gun owner in legal possession of his firearm. And for the outrageous crime of helping a woman get off the ground after she had been pushed over, he was punished with death, shot and killed by his own.
On Saturday, January 24, 2026, federal agents shot and killed a 37-year-old American citizen in Minneapolis. His name was Alex Pretti. He was an intensive care nurse at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. Within hours of his death, the highest-ranking officials in the United States government labeled him a domestic terrorist and an assassin. They claimed he had attempted to massacre law enforcement officers. These statements were not mistakes or premature conclusions. They were calculated fabrications intended to justify the state-sanctioned killing of a civilian. This script examines the evidence, the laws violated, and the absolute failure of institutional accountability. We begin with the opening judgment of the facts. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem have publicly stated that Alex Pretti was a violent domestic terrorist who attempted to murder federal agents. These claims are not supported by any available evidence. They are the opposite of the truth. These statements constitute a deliberate lie. The administration is telling the American people to ignore what they can see with their own eyes. They are using propaganda to cover up a homicide committed by federal officers in broad daylight on a public street. Here, play this clip.
Those were lies. Lies that were whipped up and spread by people in positions of authority who immediately sought to exploit the murder of a federal employee for their own partisan politics. And I refuse to fund such a lawless, out-of-control agency. I will not vote for business as usual while mass agents break into people's homes without a judicial warrant, in violation of the Fourth Amendment.
The lie must be defined with forensic precision. 3.5 hours after the shooting, Stephen Miller posted on social media that Alex Pretti was a would-be assassin who tried to murder federal law enforcement. Secretary Kristi Noem repeated this claim. She held a press conference where she stated that Pretti had committed an act of domestic terrorism and wanted to perpetuate violence. Gregory Bovino, a top Border Patrol officer, joined this effort. He claimed that Pretti wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. These are the exact claims made by the authorities in charge of the Department of Homeland Security and the White House. They assigned the labels of assassin and terrorist to a man who had not yet been buried and whose actions were still being reviewed by local authorities. Here, play this clip.
I refuse to send another cent to Stephen Miller or Kristi Noem. They are undermining our Constitution, and the department they run is murdering American citizens in the streets. She ought to be impeached, and he ought to be fired. I think their words and actions are disgusting. I just checked social media. Neither one of them has retracted or apologized for smearing Alex Pretti or slandering him as a domestic terrorist or an assassin there to massacre law.
The forensic evidence from the sources proves these claims are false. Multiple bystander videos recorded the incident from different angles. These videos show Alex Pretti was holding a cell phone, not a weapon. The footage shows he held the phone up to record the actions of the federal agents. Before he was shot, he was attempting to help a woman who had been pushed to the ground by federal officers. The evidence proves that federal agents were not aware Pretti was armed when they began beating him. The video footage reveals that Pretti was already disarmed and on the ground with his arms pinned above his head when the shots were fired. Forensic analysis of the video indicates he was shot at least 10 times in less than 5 seconds. While Pretti did have a firearm on his person, he possessed a legal concealed carry license. No video has shown Pretti unholstering his weapon or brandishing it towards officers. The evidence proves he was a law-abiding citizen exercising his right to record the police and his right to bear arms. We must now analyze the power and control dynamics behind these lies. The sources indicate that Stephen Miller is the primary architect of this narrative. When Miller heard that a gun was present at the scene, he immediately formulated a story of a massacre to justify the use of lethal force. He did this to protect the political viability of Operation Metro Surge, a militarized immigration crackdown in Minnesota. Here, play this clip.
Madam Chair, let me first address the government funding package which was added to our agenda over the weekend. And let me be crystal clear. I will be voting no on this funding package. I refuse to send another cent to Stephen Miller or Kristi Noem. They are undermining our Constitution, and the department they run is murdering American citizens in the streets. She ought to be impeached, and he ought to be fired. I think their words and actions are disgusting.
Secretary Noem has admitted that she took her directions directly from Miller and the president. This shows a chain of command where political messaging takes precedence over factual accuracy. The administration sought to exploit the murder of a federal employee for partisan politics. They used their positions of authority to smear a victim and preemptively exonerate the agents involved. This is an exercise of state power to silence dissent and avoid the legal consequences of excessive force. Here, play this clip.
There is no conceivable degree of institutional incompetence sufficient to explain the scale, consistency, and persistence of the failures that occurred. Madam Chair, we should listen to the victims. And here's what the victims say, and I quote, "Once again, survivors are having their names and identifying information exposed, while the men who abused us remained hidden and protected." The victims go on to say, and I quote, "The public still does not have the full truth."
The strongest defense argument from the administration is that the agents acted in self-defense against an armed and violent suspect. The Department of Homeland Security claimed Pretti violently resisted attempts to disarm him and that officers fired defensive shots. This argument is dismantled by the law and the visual record. Under the law, self-defense requires a reasonable belief of an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. The video evidence shows Pretti pinned to the ground with his hands above his head when he was shot. A man who is physically restrained and pinned by multiple officers does not pose an imminent threat that justifies 10 rounds of gunfire. Furthermore, the claim of brandishing a weapon is contradicted by every piece of bystander footage, which shows only a cell phone in his hand. The administration's own agents later leaked that the initial incident report was scant on details, yet Miller chose to escalate the language to assassin anyway. Even the National Rifle Association, which has historically backed the president, has pushed back against the administration's characterization of this legal gun owner. It is necessary to provide a legal education in plain English regarding the rights violated here. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures. This includes the right to be free from excessive force by the government. When a federal agent kills a citizen who is already restrained and poses no threat, they have violated the Fourth Amendment. The 10th Amendment includes the anti-commandeering doctrine. This means the federal government cannot force state or local officials to enforce federal laws or change their local policies through coercion. The president's public threats against the mayor of Minneapolis for refusing to enforce federal immigration law are a direct violation of this constitutional principle. Additionally, administrative warrants used by ICE are not the same as judicial warrants. An administrative warrant is signed by an ICE official, not a judge. It does not give agents the legal authority to break into a home without consent. Using these warrants to bypass the Fourth Amendment is an illegal practice that has been condemned by the courts. My professional judgment on the responsibility and fitness of these officials is clear. Kristi Noem, Stephen Miller, and Gregory Bovino have demonstrated they are unfit to hold their positions of public trust. They have used their offices to propagate lies that cover up the killing of an American citizen. Secretary Noem has presided over a department that has become the deadliest in more than 2 decades, with 32 people killed in 2025 alone. She has shown a lack of basic competence by repeating baseless smears without verifying the facts. Stephen Miller has demonstrated a ghoulish disregard for human life and the rule of law, haranguing agencies to increase arrest numbers regardless of legal process. Their actions have undermined the Constitution they swore to uphold. They have acted with the recklessness and brutality of an authoritarian regime. In any functional democracy, these individuals would be removed from power immediately. The expert authority stack confirms these conclusions. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey, a former prosecutor and attorney general, has denounced these actions as dangerous and unconstitutional. Congressman Jim McGovern, the ranking member of the House Rules Committee and a longtime advocate for human rights, has stated that the administration is slandering a victim to avoid accountability. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has labeled the actions of ICE as state-sanctioned thuggery and lawless disorder. Even Republican Senator Rand Paul has questioned how the Department of Homeland Security can be trusted to investigate itself when its leaders have already labeled the victim a terrorist. International authorities have also weighed in. UN Special Rapporteur Mary Lawler has identified Pretti as a human rights defender who was killed while documenting violations. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk has reminded the United States that its enforcement practices must respect human dignity and due process. These experts represent a broad consensus across legal, political, and international institutions that the federal government is acting outside the law. Institutional accountability is failing, but the pressure is mounting. Members of Congress are currently moving to hold Pam Bondi in contempt for her failure to release the Epstein files as required by law. The Epstein Files Transparency Act mandated the release of all documents by late December, but the Department of Justice has missed this deadline, releasing less than 1% of the trove. This includes documents that allegedly implicate the current president, whose name appears over 5,000 times in the files released so far. In the courts, a United States District Court judge recently noted that ICE likely violated more court orders in a single month than some agencies do in their entire existence. The federal government is also facing a lawsuit from the state of Minnesota seeking a restraining order to end Operation Metro Surge. However, the federal government is actively frustrating local investigations by seizing evidence and spiriting agents away to prevent them from being charged under state law. The procedural consequences are the only path forward. Articles of impeachment against Secretary Kristi Noem are being prepared in the House of Representatives. Senate Democrats have declared they will not vote for any funding package that includes the Department of Homeland Security budget until the agency is overhauled and reined in. This has set the stage for a potential government shutdown as current funding expires. The House Rules Committee is considering legislation to strip federal funding from agencies that violate the Fourth Amendment. There are also calls for a special master or independent counsel to take the Epstein investigation out of the hands of the Department of Justice. These are the procedural mechanisms of the law. They are being deployed to stop the lawless actions of an administration that believes it is above the Constitution. The facts are established. The government claimed Alex Pretti was an assassin. The video shows he was an ICU nurse holding a phone. The government claimed he was a terrorist. The law shows he was a citizen exercising his rights. The government claimed they acted in self-defense. The evidence shows they shot a restrained man 10 times. This is the evidence of a crime. This is the evidence of a cover-up. The accountability phase has begun. Secretary Noem's leadership has been defined by a series of controversies that raise questions about her fitness for high office. Before her appointment to the Department of Homeland Security, she faced scrutiny for the execution of her 14-month-old dog, Cricket, an act she described as a tough decision in her memoir. Her tenure as governor of South Dakota was marked by conflicts with Native American tribes, including the Oglala Sioux and Cheyenne River Sioux, over land rights and protest regulations. She also faced a unanimous report from state lawmakers finding that her daughter received preferential treatment during a real estate appraiser licensing process. These incidents demonstrate a pattern of behavior where personal impulses and political loyalty override professional standards and ethical considerations. In Washington, the power structure under Donald Trump has enabled these failures. Stephen Miller, despite being a deputy chief of staff, holds effective oversight of cabinet-level positions like Noem's. This allows an unelected advisor to direct lethal immigration policies and shape the public narrative surrounding federal killings. Miller's influence has been described as that of a prime minister, pushing ICE to achieve record arrest numbers through tactics that ignore the Fourth Amendment. This centralization of power in the hands of an official who admits he ignores protocol when it suits his narrative is a direct threat to the constitutional order. The situation in Minneapolis has reached a boiling point. For 2 consecutive Fridays, residents have filled the streets to protest what they call a corrupt regime and federal thuggery. The local government, led by Mayor Jacob Fry and Attorney General Keith Ellison, is in a direct legal battle with the Trump administration. Ellison has accused federal authorities of performing a cover-up by blocking local investigators from crime scenes and allowing agents to wear masks to avoid identification. The state's lawsuit highlights that federal presence has claimed the lives of 2 U.S. citizens in a single month, Alex Pretti and Renee Nicole Good. Good, a poet and mother of 3, was killed in her car just minutes after dropping her child off at school. Her death was ruled a homicide. The administration's disregard for the law extends beyond domestic issues. ICE agents recently attempted to enter the Ecuadorian consulate in Minneapolis without authorization, a clear violation of the Vienna Convention, which grants diplomatic immunity to sovereign consulate buildings. Video evidence shows staff blocking an agent who threatened to grab them when they refused entry. This incident has sparked a formal diplomatic protest from the Ecuadorian government. It serves as further evidence that the agencies under Secretary Noem's control view themselves as being above international law as well as domestic law. The Epstein file controversy adds another layer of institutional failure. While the administration tries to deflect attention toward the Clintons, the records show the current president's name appears 5,361 times in the documents. Evidence indicates that Donald Trump was the closest friend of Jeffrey Epstein, flying on his private jet at least 8 times. Trump has confessed that Epstein trafficked a 16-year-old girl from Mar-a-Lago to other men. Despite these direct links, the White House continues to withhold millions of documents, defying the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Pam Bondi, a top Trump ally, has been accused of selectively protecting files while names of victims are being exposed against the law. Institutional accountability must also address the failure of the Department of Justice to investigate nearly 30 associates of Epstein who allegedly received secret settlements. Ghislaine Maxwell, currently serving 20 years for sex trafficking, has alleged in a legal petition that the DOJ is protecting these individuals. There are growing concerns about a quid pro quo between the administration and Maxwell, as she was recently moved from a maximum security cell to a low-security prison camp with unusual privileges after speaking with Department of Justice officials. These privileges include private visitations and meal service in her cell. The legislative response is the final pillar of accountability. Congressman McGovern has been joined by other lawmakers like Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie in demanding an independent counsel to investigate the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files. In the Senate, the Democratic caucus is united in its refusal to bankroll federal agencies that brutalize innocent citizens in the streets. Senator Schumer has stated that the Senate will not pass the DHS budget as written and will insist on an overhaul of ICE to ensure public safety. This is not a matter of partisan politics. It is a matter of basic law and order. The procedural steps are moving forward. The House will vote on the impeachment of Kristi Noem. The Senate will hold hearings for the heads of ICE and Border Patrol. The courts will hear the arguments for a restraining order against Operation Metro Surge. These are the tools of a democracy under threat. They are the only way to hold the liars and the killers accountable. Alex Pretti was a man who spent his life caring for veterans in the ICU. He died because he tried to help a woman who had been knocked down by his own government. He died because a federal agent fired 10 rounds into his restrained body. And he was slandered because Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem thought a lie would be more politically useful than the truth. They were wrong. The evidence is on the record. The law is clear. The accountability is coming. The United Nations has made it clear that the United States is being watched. Any government that claims legitimacy must be willing to be judged by the standards of human rights it invokes against others. If America wants to stand for human rights, it must start by telling the truth about what happened in Minneapolis. No badge, no agency, and no president is above the law. The facts of the Pretti case provide a forensic map of how state power is being abused. The bystander videos have broken the administration's monopoly on the narrative. The truth is now accessible to every citizen. We must also acknowledge the broader pattern of ICE's lawless disorder. The agency has been accused of using children as bait to detain family members, as seen in the case of a 5-year-old native of Ecuador. They have encircled schools with riot gear and conducted raids without judicial warrants. This is not border security. It is the terrorizing of communities to the point where people are afraid to go to work or church. The Department of Homeland Security has abandoned its mission of safety and has become a tool for political retribution and authoritarian control. The professional judgment remains. The officials responsible for these actions are unfit for office. Their lies have been exposed by the evidence. Their violations of the 4th and 10th Amendments are documented. Their failure to comply with federal transparency laws regarding the Epstein files is on the record. The institutions of the United States are now tasked with the duty of enforcement. Impeachment, The withholding of funds and judicial intervention are the necessary procedural consequences. Alex Pretti's parents are facing a staggering grief. Their son was a decent man, described by his colleagues as the kindest soul you could meet. He was a nurse who dedicated his life to helping others, and his last act was an act of help. The government's response to his death was to lie to the public and protect his killers. This analysis has presented the evidence to dismantle those lies. The law does not allow the government to execute restrained citizens and then slander their memory to avoid accountability. The prosecution of these facts is the only way to restore the rule of law. Institutional failure is not permanent if the procedural consequences are enforced. The House of Representatives has the power to impeach. The Senate has the power of the purse. The courts have the power of the injunction. These are the mechanisms of accountability that must now be used to their full extent. The killing of Alex Pretti and the subsequent lies by the Trump administration represent a clear and present danger to the constitutional liberties of every American citizen. The facts have been presented, the law has been cited, the accountability phase is now.